Hi, I'm Bill and this is 6 Rounds Studio. Today we're back in the shop working on the 1905 Ithaca shotgun restoration. Today we're going to cut and install the applique or additional wood to the side panels of that buttstock on the Ithaca. And to get that done, what I need to do is I need to get some good smooth or clearly cut mating surfaces so that the cut that I put on the side of the gun stock a week or two ago is going to fit or match up very well to these appliques, to these blocks. Now, I sliced off a piece of walnut that the grain matched fairly closely the color and the straightness of the grain on the original gun stock. What I need to do is I've taken that piece of slab that I cut off and I've cut it into two smaller sections, and I'm going to mill those sections on the mill to get that nice mating surface. Now these are basically the size of the finish appliques. So what I need to do, I need to clamp this. I cannot clamp it across the grain because the wood is actually very weak in this direction or along the grain, so it flexes very easily. So I had to cut these to length so that I can clamp it with the grain or along the length of the grain. When I clamped it the other way, the piece of wood actually bowed and flexed, and if I mill it and then release it, then that bow is going to find its way into the piece of wood, and I'm not going to get a good glue up surface. There'll be tensions tensions in the wood after the epoxy dries. So what I did is I cut it lengthwise, and then I'm going to clamp it in the mill. I can apply a little extra tension. I still can't over clamp it because these pieces are only about 210 thousandths thick. And of course the problem with that is if I can still over pressurize the wood and begin to bend it. I don't want to do that. So I just need enough clamping pressure to keep this piece in place while I mill it. Let's go start up the phase converter and get these pieces cut. I told you in a previous video that when cutting wood, whether it's with a router or even with the Bridgeport mill, we want our RPMs to be fairly fast. Again, that helps to sever the wood fibers cleaner, and it also helps reduce the amount of vibration that we get transmitted from the cutter back into the wood. Now, I'm only going to take the minimum amount of material off that I need to in order to clean this up. Again, the more material you take off at a time, the higher the risk of vibrations being transmitted through the piece. So we're going to take small amounts out. I'm going to start out with roughly 10 thousandths amount of cut or cut path, and I'm thinking that 10 thousandths ish ought to be able to clean this up really pretty nice. All right, so I don't know if the mic on the camera picked it up, but even only taking off that 10,000ths, you could still hear some vibration back into the piece of wood, which again is a good indication that you try to take too much off at a time. Again, you get the risk of distorting the part that you're trying to cut. Now, before I take it out of the vise, what I want to do is I want to scrape it down with this scraper. And the scraper has a very flat or straight edge. And that's going to help remove any of the tooling marks that I ended up leaving behind because you always get the swirls from the cutter. So I want to get that smoothed off. All right, that's nice and smooth. Let's pull this off. And let's do the other one. I'll bring you guys back when this one's done. All right, that looks really, really good. So let's bring these over to the gun stock and let's figure out how we're going to align the grain on these blocks so that they closely match the orientation of the grain on the gun stock. So I've mounted the receiver onto the stock temporarily. So it helps me to get a better visual of how the grain orients to the wood itself. And when we look at this, it's obvious that the grain follows very closely the direction of the receiver or the metal itself. And if we turn this over, we see a similar result. The grain comes in nice and straight to the recoil surface on into the metal. Which for a well-designed buttstock, it should do that. Now I have these two pieces that I cut out, and the mating surfaces that I cut on the Bridgeport really enhance or show the grain very, very well. When I flip it over, you have to use a little bit of imagination, if you will, to see that grain structure better. But we're going to try and use some of this darker section in here as opposed to use this lighter section on the outside. You have these darker bands of color on the inside that are going to look pretty nice on the gun stock when it's all set up. So you can see these dark bands in the original wood. So when I add this in, it'll help sort of follow through with those darker bands and get us a pretty nice continuation of the color of the wood from beginning to end. What I do have to do, though, is I have to orient these in this direction to make sure that those bandings are going to go in the direction that I want them to go, so that this nice dark band here is sort of picking up this band and moving all the way forward to the front of this. I'm going to label this panel the right side, and I'm going to label it on the outer portion that we're eventually going to mill away, because we have to mill this down so that it's the same level as the receiver. And we'll do the same on the left side. And we're going to have to orient that and call this the left side. And we'll X what's going to be the front of the cutoff. So now I've got to figure out exactly where in this, right about there is going to be the right place. So right here and right here, what I've done is I've drawn two lines that match these, the top and bottom of the wood. Because it's too long, I've got to shorten this. You can see how much longer it is than it needs to be. So I'm going to just draw a pencil line. And it's on the same relative angle as the receiver. I'm going to take this piece over and I'm going to bring it onto the bandsaw, and I'm going to cut it just a slight bit long. And that'll give me the basic angle that this is relative to the gun stock. And then that'll get me ready for the next step, which is to actually template this and bandsaw the excess material out so that I can get ready or prep to glue this on. Let's do the other side. Again, I'm trying to follow this grain, or these grain lines, so that it matches the grain lines on the wood itself, or closely thereof. All right. So same thing. Sort of get a sense of where, by these two lines, where it's going to fit top to bottom. Kind of holding that in place. Come on the other side and we'll draw another line to match that up, or to cut that away. All right, you know how a bandsaw works. I'm going to go cut these off and then I'll bring this back. So here's my right side. And you'll notice that I've cut this slightly long so that I've got enough room. I have to, at the end, trim this back so that it exactly matches this edge here, or this angle, so that it then butts up against the recoil surface on the receiver properly. So what I've got is, if you remember, I did a template of that other Ithaca, and I'm going to just place this on here. And if you also remember that from my mistake video, that these panels are by design smaller, is I'm going to be able to trace this out. Then I'm going to bandsaw away this excess material, and having completed that, we're ready to glue them or epoxy them onto the stock itself. Then I'm going to simply trace the template. So now I have that shape templated into the applique that I'm going to glue to this stock. Let's do the other side. Alright, so now I've got both the left and the right side ready to get bandsawed. Okay, so we've got our two appliques all cut. And essentially they look like a sort of modified version of the template. And they fit on here just like this. You can see that they are proud of the wood on both of these sides, which is fine. We're going to leave it that way. We're going to glue it up. And we're definitely proud on the front of the stock as well. So together, as a sandwich, it's going to look like this. All right, I've got nothing else to do to prep these, so let's mix up some epoxy and get this thing sandwiched together. So if you've been a regular viewer or visitor to this channel, then you know that when I cut this on the mill, it exposed a lot of oils underneath. Over the last several days, I've been using acetone to try and draw away the oil. In fact, my last application was about a half an hour ago. So that we've got this nice and bright, so that we've removed as much of that oil as we can. We want to get this glued up fairly quickly because that oils that are embedded in the wood will again begin to migrate. So we want to get this glued up, relatively quickly. So we're going to use just a standard epoxy. I just believe it's the right material for this. So I have a 2-part epoxy that I'm mixing up. And I've also spoken in the past about making sure that you're using either a 12 or 24-hour epoxy. You need to leave yourself enough open time so that this doesn't start to harden before you had a chance to get your whatever you're gluing up into position. 5-minute epoxies are never, for these kind of repairs, are never a good material to use. All right, so we've got this mixed up. Now what I'm going to do, this may seem counterintuitive, I'm going to add a little bit of white pigments into the epoxy. I want to lighten it. This is going to show a thin line where this glue up is. And if I don't apply the white, it will leave a dark line. I mean, it's going to be fairly thin, but it'll leave a dark line. Now, you would think, well, why don't you add a darker pigment? Well, same thing. The darker pigment is just going to make a darker line. I'm going to have to faux or color this line out, make it disappear. It's much easier to faux over a lighter color than it is to faux over a darker color, because I can blend the color down into a darker color. If I don't, I'm going to have to add white pigments over the top of it before I do the final faux. So I've got just a little bit of white. I'm going to add that white in. I didn't add very much. And what I'm creating is white epoxy. I've got my clamp. I've got my applique, and we're ready to glue it up. Okay. And then finally, the last thing before we walk away from this is we want to clean away that excess epoxy so it doesn't get too deep into the original grain structure. You can use acetone, or you can use denatured alcohol. So we're only going to do the one side right now. If I was to try and glue up both sides of these, I'd become a nightmare trying to get all that oriented at the same time. All right, so we're going to do the same thing on the other side tomorrow. I don't need to bring you through that, but what I will do is when I've got both of these done, I will bring you back, show you the completed gun stock, or show you how it's completed with the 2 appliques glued up. It's been a couple days since we glued these appliques onto the side panels of the 1905 Ithaca, and it's time to unclamp them and see how this all turned out. So this is what we ended up with, and it's all nice and solid. So the epoxy held really well. So the next time we get together, we're going to mill these panels down so that they're same height as the receivers. And when that's done, then we'll start doing the shaping and get those nice pointy panels that is typical of these older shotguns, and get this thing so that it looks really nice. All right. Getting those side panels done, getting them shaped up, getting them fit to the receiver. At that point, we can start the polishing process on these on the metal on the receiver. I don't want to start doing that until I've gotten all the work done shaping up these panels, because there's a good chance that I'm going to end up touching this metal in some way while I'm doing that work. I'm going to try not to do that, but there is a chance that I will. So I do not want to risk having this all polished before I get these panels all shaped. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Please ring that bell so you get notified the next time I post a video. Share it with your friends if you will. I'll see you in the next video.